Fake pizza guy at my door. This happened back when I was 17 and living in a small rural village. I had been at a friend's all evening watching films and chilling, and I left to go home around 11 p.m. It was quite a long walk back to mine, as she lived on the outskirts of the village down some back roads. I felt relatively safe, as when it got to a certain time of night it was quiet. You wouldn't bump into anybody and there would hardly be any cars on the roads, especially at that late hour. It was weirdly peaceful. Where I lived was a large avenue with two big blocks of houses, like two big circles that you would get to after following a small dark road that consisted of a few large old houses and a vicarage. As I am passing the vicarage, I see this little beat-up red Nissan Micra coming towards me. The closer it gets, the more it slows down, and the guy is nearly breaking his neck trying to look at me. I mean, there was nothing subtle about it. It nearly came to a full stop as it drew alongside me, and I started to panic. There was not another soul about, just me and this strange guy. I was determined not to get myself in a tiz, so I picked up the pace and refused to look at him. As far as I know, he drove off. I continued walking home, which was literally a 5-minute straight line from there, and I kept listening out for a car engine and was vigilant of any headlights creeping up behind me. I heard nothing and saw nothing, so I breathed a sigh of relief as I could now see my house. I walked in and locked the door and saw my mum stood the living room chatting on the phone. I'm trying to interrupt her conversation, telling her about the weird guy in the red car, when for some reason she goes to the front window and peeks through the curtain, and she takes the phone from her ear and says, "What, that car?" This is all in a minute since walking through the door, and I'm thinking to myself, it can't be him, because if he had followed me I would have heard the car. Before I even get a chance to look for myself, there is a knock at the front door, so I go and answer it, only pulling it open a few inches, and there is this guy stood there empty-handed, wearing like a baseball cap. It was the same guy, the same car. I'm just like, WTF. I say, "Can I help you? Did you order a pizza?" He asks me, and I'm like, "No, I think you have the wrong house." Taking a step towards me, he says again in a not fucking around kind of tone, "No," I said, "Did you order a pizza?" Before I reply, my mum has come up behind me, opened the door fully, and says, "Is there a problem?" This causes him to back up, mumbling, "I must have the wrong address," before he gets in his car and takes off. Sure to say, we were both a bit spooked and made sure everywhere was locked up properly. So to the stealthy alleged pizza guy who stalked me home, let's not meet. I deliver pizzas and was sent to what was almost definitely a robbery/murder/jumping. So I work at a pizza place, usually inside, as my insurance does not cover claims when driving for business, but occasionally I will cover a delivery shift for one of the drivers because the money is good. Our delivery area includes a few new development, upper middle class, cookie-cutter neighborhoods, bad tips, an older 1940s-era village, average tips, 2 apartment complexes, great tips, some trailer parks, great tips or no tips, and a bunch of rural areas, usually good tips. Not rural to the point seeing hundreds of stars at night, but enough that you couldn't hear your neighbors yell. So about a week ago I was covering a delivery shift. I come back to the shop feeling pretty good. I'm averaging $5 a delivery, and they have all been pretty close, and check to see if I have any more deliveries. I have one to an address I have never seen before. We have mostly semi-regulars get deliveries, so an address that doesn't seem the least bit familiar is odd. It's out on one of the more rural roads. I asked the kid who took the order what was up, because there were special instructions on the ticket. He says, they said go around back because the front door is not operational. I'm like, okay, that's not that uncommon. People often want you to go around back. Either they painted the door, the house shifted and it's a bitch to open, or they are just hanging out back. So as I'm driving out to the house, and I get an odd feeling. I don't really like the idea of going to the back of some house out in the sticks. It would all be too easy for some thugs to order a pizza to an abandoned house. There are quite a few in the more rural areas, then jump the delivery guy. I figure I'll scope the place out when I get there, and if it seems sketchy, just call them and make some bull up about how it's against company policy to go around back of houses to prevent robberies. As I am driving to the house, I realize it's towards the end of this road that gets less populated the further down you go. Great. I'm pretty near the address and driving slow. I see this house abandoned looking and set back from the roads with no address and in a bunch of trees. I think, that house better not be it, so I drive past and check the next house's address, and lo and behold, that abandoned looking one was the right house. Shit. At this point I am not super worried though, because out in the boonies the standards of upkeep on your house are pretty low, so a house in disrepair isn't unusual. So I double back to this house and pull into the driveway. At this point I am getting bad vibes, it just doesn't feel right. So I park my car at the very end of the driveway with the rear of the car on the shoulder so anyone passing by can clearly see it. At this point I call back to the shop and tell them I'm at this sketchy house, and if I don't call back in 4 or 5 minutes call me, and if I don't answer call the cops. While I am on the phone I take a chance to take a good look at the house. It looks extremely abandoned and not just in disrepair. The driveway is crumbling, bits are gravel and there are weeds growing out of it. There is no mailbox, no trash cans, no car, no lawnmowers, no landscaping, no kids' toys, absolutely nothing in the yard. The yard hasn't been mowed in what looks like years, the house is total crap, the roof is all but falling apart, the siding is falling apart, the back deck which comes around the side is falling apart, the only part of the house that looks even a little bit decent is the allegedly non-functioning front door. The windows are all shut, it's 95 degrees and humid and this place does not have AC/C, they all have the blinds or curtains shut. The few that aren't are actually boarded up. I don't even see any wires running to this house. It's not dark but is dusk and there isn't a sign of any lights on in the house. At this point I am starting to get pretty nervous. I am a 5 feet 10 inches male, 180 pounds, not in any great shape, but I did take karate for 10 years, so I'm not helpless, but I do try to avoid any sort of confrontation I can, as I am mostly a pacifist. I'm not too concerned about getting robbed, no skin off my teeth, it's not my money. I mean, I would rather not get robbed, but I'm mostly worried about getting jumped or killed. It's a fairly safe area, but recently there have been some rather unsavory people moving in from the city. A big spike in home invasions and robberies, but more worrying, a few stabbings and assaults, so it's time to either nut up or shut up. I'm not just going to go charging in there like a fool, so I get out my phone and call the number they gave when ordering. While I'm doing that I'm also getting the pizza out and make sure to leave my door open. A running car half in the road at an abandoned house with the door open looks suspicious, right? I figure if shit goes down it might look out of place enough to make someone stop, not that there is really any traffic this far down the road. I am starting to walk up to the house while the phone's ringing. It rings twice and then an automated message comes on. It says something along the lines of, this phone number is associated with an internet texting app, one of the free ones you download and let you send free texts from a different phone number over a data connection. I think it was haywire. We have had issues with people using numbers from those services for pranks in the past. This is huge red flag. My heart is now pounding in my throat and my whole body is telling me to bail. I don't want to get a reputation for being a flaky bitch as a driver and lose any future delivery shifts, and that is why I have not bailed yet. So I'm just standing there holding a pizza looking at this house but not wanting to venture around to the back of it. I'm hoping that the resident will look out the window and come out by the road to get their food. So I am looking at the front windows checking for some sign of life. I see a blind go up on the one window next to the front door and a really creepy looking guy, with a hat pulled low and big sunglasses on, is looking out. Remember, he is in a completely dark house surrounded by trees. At dusk, there is no reason for him to be wearing sunglasses. I also see what appears to be a big guy standing behind him in the room. This could have been anything though. When he sees me looking, he mouths something and he darts away, presumably towards the allegedly broken front door. At this point I nope the fuck out. I had stayed pretty close to my car, so it was only a few steps away, so I jumped into the driver's seat and throw the pizza into my passenger seat, something I would never do since I am really anal about keeping my car clean. I slam it into reverse, before I get the clutch all the way, and so I grind my gears a little, again something I never do. Without looking I simultaneously slam and lock my door, and floor it backwards onto the main road, slipping my clutch horribly, but at this point I don't care. I don't want to fuck around and risk a stall. I did not even check for cross traffic, really stupid on my part. I start to drive away and look back at the house. The screen door on the outside of the front door is now open, but the front is still shut. The guy isn't out in the yard yelling "wait, come back" or anything, he's just gone. So I pull over a little ways up the road to call back to shop and tell them I'm all good and I'll elaborate when I get back. The people never called back to inquire about their food. People usually call if their pizza is 15 minutes late, and these people never got it, so it's really strange they didn't call. Pretty much confirming they were up to no good. After telling my coworkers about it, we conclude it was definitely a robbery at the very least. so we put the address and phone number on our no deliveries list, and ate their pizza. I doubt I would have actually gotten murdered or anything. Robbed with maybe a gun pulled or a little roughing up, yes. But it was still very unnerving that I easily could have gotten into some serious trouble by just doing my job. Especially if the idiots picked a slightly less abandoned house to set up at. Sorry for a relatively minor incident being so long, but hey, I like to write even if I am not that good at it. Anyone who delivers pizza, be wary of situations like this. I looked into it and apparently it is a pretty common way to rob pizza guys. I'm pretty glad we did not end up meeting. I, a pizza guy, intercepted a kidnapping during a delivery. I deliver pizza and I'd been having a really busy night, non-stop back and forth, without any time to even pause and take a leak. I'd been so busy that I wasn't really thinking about bathroom breaks. But we're also going through a bit of a heat wave in our area, so I've been drinking copious amounts of water. All of a sudden, as I was driving to this particular delivery, the urge to go hit me. Like, things went from 0 to 60 in an instant. Thankfully I was close to the customer so could get this one over with quickly. Or so I thought. I pulled up to the house, and it was an area I'd delivered in before, so I could immediately see that something wasn't right. All the lights were off in the house, not even the glow of a television or anything. It was extra apparent because the streetlight closest to the door happened to be out of order. And on top of it all, the block was dead quiet. This is a big university area, and obviously there aren't many student renters in July, but there had to be at least one person, because someone ordered this pizza. Maybe they just like sitting in the dark or they were out back in the yard, whatever. I just didn't want to get out of my car and knock on a quiet house in the middle of the night, around 9:30 p.m., without first checking that I had the correct address and the customer was inside. It was scorching that night, even after sundown. My car's AC is a joke, and the piping hot pizzas don't help things much, so I have to try and open the car door as infrequently as possible to keep any cool air in. I called the number the customer provided and the voice on the other end said, kind of brusquely and out of breath, "Yeah." I just tried to keep it clear and concise, "Hey, it's your pizza out front but there doesn't appear to be anybody home." And the customer replied, still gasping for air, "Yeah, I'm not home." I had to pee so badly by that point that I was much less patient than I'd otherwise be with a customer right out of the gate. "Well, then we're going to have to terminate the order, because I've arrived in the stated delivery window and you were supposed to pay in cash. So, I don't know what to tell you. Plan ahead next time." I instantly regretted letting my bladder do the talking for me as the voice on the other end came through more clearly as a young, bubbly, and very distraught girl who couldn't have been older than 20 or 25. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I was running down the street so I could barely hear you," she cried. "I just switched you out of my AirPods. Is that better?" "Sorry, I completely lost track of time at work, but I knew you were coming, that's why I'm literally running home right now. Please don't leave, I'm starving, and I don't have a car. Seriously, please don't leave. 5 minutes tops, okay? I know what it's like to be hungry and running late, and have no car but not live near any restaurants." Plus, when I heard her voice I began to remember more specifically having delivered to this place a couple times before, and she'd always been perfectly nice. Now I felt bad for snapping at her. I tried to walk it back, while simultaneously looking out my window for potential spots to pee. No, my bad. I'm letting the heat get to me and it's not your fault. No need to rush. See you when you get here. I hung up and, while surveilling the street, was starting to think I was really out of luck. All the other houses had people in them, and were close together, so there were no clumps of trees or out-of-the-way patches of land or anything. Of course I had just tossed my empty water bottle at the last delivery, because I'm an idiot. Finally, I decided it was escalating to the point of an emergency, and the safest bet was to use a bush in front of the woman's house. She wasn't home. The street light was out so no one would see me. The people who were home were inside. My car was parked across the street and we're a small shop who don't wear uniforms, so if someone did spot me, they'd have no way to connect me to my employer. Animals pee outside all the time. Humans are animals. This is fine. I scurried over to the tallest bush in her front yard. She didn't really have much of a yard, more just a walkway lined with bushes and flowers that ran adjacent to her front door. The biggest cluster of bushes, the only one where I could be sure there would be no visible splatter on the side of the house, was about 4 feet from her door. I looked both ways, unzipped, and let fly. After the initial millisecond of relief, I noticed the sound was way off, more like pissing on something solid than something leafy. I started panicking, thinking I'd aimed wrong. But once I start, I can't stop midstream, so I kept squinting into the darkness to see if maybe I was hitting a key rock or something and could just move a few inches over. Instead, all of a sudden, I heard a way more concerning noise. A deep voice exclaiming, "What the fuck?" And before I could turn around, assuming I'd been caught by a neighbor, a man came leaping out of the bushes. He blew by me, brushing my golden shower off him as did. He spit pretty emphatically on the ground, so I think I might have beamed him right in the face. I didn't see where he went after a few paces, but, though this next part is kind of a blur, I do think I remember hearing a car screech out from a bit further away after a minute. I'd gotten some night vision by that point, so I was able to make out his height, build, and outfit, but only the most general details of each. I was in such shock that I didn't even put my dick away. I just stood there trying to figure out what had happened. The reality was so terrifying that my mind refused to accept it, and impulsively searched for a reasonable explanation that could make everything okay. I thought, could these bushes lead to some backyard area and just looked like they were against the house? Could they have been obscuring an open window? My inner voice was desperately screaming, bruh, that man was wearing a hoodie in 90-degree weather. That was a bad man. You're in a bad situation. But the very idea that I was within inches of a guy who would be hiding in bushes at all, let alone in front of a young woman's house at night, just wasn't something I was ready to grapple with yet. I was coping by not coping. My fight or flight response totally failed me at that point, because my dumbass did the absolute last thing I should have done, and approached the bushes to try and validate this. There must have been a good reason for a man in a hoodie to be behind these bushes in the middle of the night. Theory. So I walked over to the side, turned on my phone flashlight, and tried to peer around the line of shrubbery. Pro tip: as scary as things may look in the dark, seeing them with a single beam of your flashlight can sometimes make it even worse. That's when I saw the bag. There was a tattered drawstring bag sitting behind the bushes, slightly splashed with pee. But I was in such a moronic daze from shock that I groped around for it, thinking, see, this is it. This will explain why he was back here. It explained it. Once I maneuvered it over and pulled it open, I saw a sharp knife, a roll of duct tape, and a bottle of pills. The delusions officially broke at that point, and all the adrenaline, endorphins, and self-preservation instincts that had been suppressed kicked in 10 times over. I became whatever the opposite of dazed is. More laser-focused than I have ever been in my life, with one singular goal: get back to my car. I dropped the bag, booked it across the street, got in my car, and slammed the pedal to the floor before the door was even all the way closed. I went as far as I could, as fast as I could, until I hit a red signal. Then I pulled off to the side and realized I shouldn't be driving any more than necessary in the condition I was in. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour drugstore and took a breath. I was finally calm and coherent enough to zip up and formulate a plan of action. My first lucid thought was, who do I call first, the police or the girl whose house that was? I thought about it for what couldn't have really been more than 10 seconds, but felt like an hour, and decided, okay. I am in my locked car with the engine running. If trouble starts, I can drive away. I know something's up. She might not. She needs to know not to keep walking in that direction. But as I was dialing her number, it occurred to me, what if there was no girl? I thought I remembered delivering to that house before, but what if I was wrong? What if the girl on the phone was just a decoy to get me there to rob me? Or worse, every pizza guy on the planet has seen the Evil Genius documentary by now, so I thought she called me all out of breath. She wasn't home. The whole thing was off. Can't risk it. I'll start with the cops. I called 911. The operator was very helpful in keeping me calm, because I was a complete wreck by this point. He kept assuring me that someone would be there soon. I kept telling them they had to get there before the girl did, but I was trying to express 3 thoughts at once, and really damaging my own credibility. It came out more as, you've got to save this girl because he wasn't after me, I was just delivering a pizza. Unless they were after me, in which case there might not be a girl, but I talked to one on the phone, so then you should find that girl because they used her to lure me there. But if she's real, she doesn't know about the guy, who was also real, and there could be more guys if there's actually a girl. And you know what? Even if there isn't a girl, there might actually be more guys. I only checked one part of the bushes, so I don't actually know. But we'll know which guy is the one I saw because I pissed all over him, you know. I didn't mean to. This was back when I thought the girl was real but not home, but she might be real, so you really need to find her if she is, because the guy was real. Finally, they basically just asked me to stop talking and stay on the line. But that was when I saw an incoming call from the customer. I couldn't answer it without disrupting my 911 call, so I just ignored it, but then she sent me this text like, "Hey, I'm here, don't see you." I told 911 she was there and they said officers were only minutes away. But who knows how long that meant. Especially after I'd given such a scattered account of the events in my panic, I just felt overwhelmed with guilt. Because my rational mind said the odds of her being a decoy girl for some large scam targeting pizza guys were low and the odds of her being the intended victim of a predator were high, so I put my 911 call on mute, where I can hear them but they can't hear me, and turned back, heart absolutely pounding out of my chest, compulsively muttering fuck, 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 the entire way. Then I took 911 off mute and told them I had returned to look for the girl. They weren't happy about that, but I saw her meandering past the parked cars in the street looking to see if one was mine. And I waved her down, flashing my brights. She bounced on over to the window of my car, happy-go-lucky. I figured that was a good sign that she wasn't in on whatever this was. But I was just so scared to be back in the general area and to not know what had just happened or what was going to happen. I kept whispering, "Get in. Get in." And she was like, "Get it." Huh? Oh. You want me to get the pizza from the back? I didn't want to make the same mistake with her that I had made with 911, so instead of trying to tell the whole story, I stuck to the bare basic facts. There was a man in your bushes. I'm on the phone with the police. I don't know where he is right now. Please get in the car so we can lock the doors. I was barely able to get even those sentences out, and I was shaking like I'd had 10 cups of black coffee. I held up my phone with 911 on the call screen to verify it for her. I thought that was why she got in the car with no further explanation, but it turns out that wasn't entirely it. You still there? Is she with you? Are you safe? Is anyone else there? 911 kept checking in, not knowing who the third party I was talking to was. I reassured them, and we drove, more cautiously this time, to a location 911 instructed us to wait at to speak with police after they cleared the area. I didn't actually have to do much after that. The police came pretty soon after. A police car met us. I gave a statement telling them everything I observed, and she went to go speak to more officers in more detail than they needed me for. It turns out the reason she got right into a strange pizza guy's car without probing any deeper into my story is because she knew who the man was right away from my description. She had an abusive ex-boyfriend who was apparently psychotic enough that he immediately came to mind from hearing "There's a guy in your bushes." She later called us to thank me and insist on leaving a huge tip. I wasn't there when the call came, and so the kid who answered didn't know to refuse to accept the money. But the manager already promised the next time we see her we can load her up with enough one free pie cards to last a lifetime. Easily the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, on the job or off. I don't get the chance to tell the story much, because I try to avoid sharing it with anyone who could possibly know the girl or know of the event, but I'm still not the same since. Even though I know he didn't even have anything to do with me directly, this truly shook me to my core. So, man in the bushes, let's not meet. Pizza creep, my boyfriend, and I have terrible eating habits. One night, after a long Wolfenstein session, he was craving pizza. He wanted the greasiest, most heart-blocking pizza we could find. Luckily for him, there's a Pizza Hut down the road. He ordered it online, but as we're both stingy, we decided to pick it up instead of having to pay a delivery fee. I waited in the car while he went inside to pick it up. Now, this Pizza Hut is situated in the parking lot of a strip mall, so one would assume it's a brightly lit, safe space. One would be incredibly mistaken. The parking lot was pitch black if you weren't right next to the restaurant. Usually this doesn't bother me, but that night there was something wrong with our order and we needed to wait another half hour to get it. I still stayed in the car because I assumed the pizza would be ready in, like, 5 minutes or something. I just decided to relax and jam to some CDs. A truck pulled in right next to my car. It was rusted and dented, but that's not uncommon in my redneck-infested town. It seemed the occupants were in the same situation as us. The driver ran in to get their order and the passenger stayed behind. I tuned them out until the passenger started moving erratically. I looked over and the man was clearly on something. His stringy hair was plastered to his forehead and trailed down the back of his worn-out denim vest, but what truly scared me was how he moved. He was talking to himself, non-stop babbling that I couldn't comprehend. And his entire torso was bobbing up and down. I'm not usually so easy to frighten, but the entire situation just seemed wrong. I texted my boyfriend, pleading with him to come back to the car, but he was adamant on getting his food. The man in the truck looked me dead in the eyes and gave me the most sinister grin I've ever seen. That was when I realized he had been masturbating. I quickly locked the car doors and scrambled to find the small knife I keep in my glove box. Now armed and alarmed, the man and I stared each other down. Just as the truck door swung open, my boyfriend emerged from the restaurant, pizza in hand. Leave it to a theater nerd to know when to make an entrance. My boyfriend unlocked his door and was about to slide in when the men confronted him. To my horror, the man's pants were wet in patches, and he gave my boyfriend a shit-eating grin. "Usually I don't like the fat ones," he said, voice gravelly and deep, "but I'll make an exception." "How much for an hour?" I started to cry. My man straightened his back, and while creepy truck guy easily towered over him, he gave his best intimidating glare, "More than what your life is worth." After his moment of bravado, my boyfriend quickly slid into the car and peeled out of the parking lot. We weren't followed, but I was paranoid for the rest of the night. At least the pizza was good, pizza creep. Let's not meet. You ordered a pizza. Not a date with me. When I was 20 years old, so 6 years ago, I worked as a delivery girl for a pretty popular pizzeria in my area. Initially, I worked the late morning to mid-afternoon shift, but when the guy who delivered for the night shift ended up getting fired due to him losing his license because of a DUI, I was placed on the night shift since my boss hired a family friend who could only work my shift for whatever reason. I really didn't want this shift because you never know if people who order late at night actually want a pizza or if they have other intentions in mind. Unfortunately, my boss was an asshole and essentially told me if I wasn't willing to work the night shift I was fired. I wasn't exactly in a position where I could be out of work, albeit temporarily, so I reluctantly worked the shift. The first month of this shift went by without any issues until I had to deliver a pizza to a house that just barely made our delivery radius. I punch it in on my GPS and the house was located in a pretty suburban part of the city. I arrive and it's about 11 p.m. The block was extremely quiet, decently lit, and mostly littered with modern townhouses, but the house I delivered to was a duplex. I ring the doorbell and wait for about 30 seconds. No answer. I ring it again and wait another 30 seconds. Still no answer. I'm standing there getting pretty nervous that something's about to go down. But thankfully a man opens the door. He looked like he was in his late 40s, he was pretty tall, maybe a little over 6 foot, and he was very skinny. I tell him his pizza is here and he just stands there staring at me. I asked him if he was okay and he responded by saying, "Yeah, I'm fine, sorry. I got off work not too long ago and I'm zoning out a bit." Fair enough, I suppose. He hands me the money, I hand him the pizza, and as I'm making change he says, "You're really beautiful, you know that." Not really thinking too much into it, I thanked him for the compliment and gave him his change. I said good night and he did too. I walked back to my car and finished my deliveries for the night. A few days later I get a delivery order to the same place. I head over there around the same time as last time and ring the doorbell. He answers the door very excitedly and said, "Hey, it's you again. How are you?" I told him I was tired and can't wait to go home, to which he chuckled and said, "I know that feeling pretty well," as he was pulling out his wallet. As he's counting his money, he asks me what my name is. Being kinda tired at this point and not really thinking straight, I stupidly tell him my name. As I'm making change, he asks if he could have my number as he'd love to hang out with someone as gorgeous as I am. Whoa buddy, pump the brakes. I've literally only met this guy like twice to deliver a pizza. I had no idea who this guy was, and I'm positive he barely knew who I was as well. Another thing to mention is that I looked way younger than I was at the time. I was told by numerous people that I still looked like I was 15, and I was hoping he thought differently and wasn't hitting on what he thought was a teenager. I'm just standing there awkwardly for a few seconds before I muster out, "Sorry, I have a boyfriend." He gets upset and says, "Oh, okay. I see." We stand there in silence before I tell him to have a good night and walk back to my car. He says nothing and still stands at the doorway staring at me until he finally went back inside once I started my car. I got a pretty creepy vibe from this guy and even brought it up to my coworkers, and they agreed it was pretty creepy. Except for my boss, who overheard everything and claimed I was making up stories and trying to gain sympathy for having to take the shift. Fucking asshole. A week later, as I'm working the night shift, and we get an order from the same guy again, and this is when shit finally hits the fan. I arrive at the house at around 10:30 p.m. and keep in mind that from my perspective on the road, it didn't look like a single light in that house was on. I get out of my car and I walk to the front door with the pizza box in my arms. As I'm approaching the door, it quickly swings open to reveal the man, except this time he was wearing a suit, and I jump back. He laughs and said, "Sorry if I scared you. I saw you out the window and figured I'd just open the door now so that you wouldn't have to ring the bell." I was getting scared because, as I mentioned before, there were no lights on in the house, so was he sitting in the dark this whole time? And if so, why? I nervously laugh and say it's okay. He asked me if I liked his suit, to which I said yes. He then asks me, "Would you like to go on a date with me tonight?" What the fuck? I once again tell him I have a boyfriend, to which he chuckles, gets close to me, and says, "Honey, there's no way a girl your age is in a serious relationship. If you go on a date with me, I'll show you how a real man treats a girl." He grabs the pizza box from me and throws it to the side and grabs me by my arms hard. I'm officially shitting bricks at this point and trying not to cry from the fear that was overwhelming me. I start pleading with him, "Dude, please. I just want to go home. I don't want to go on a date tonight." He just stares at me with the most sinister look I've seen on someone's face and says, "I don't care. Get inside now. We're gonna have a good time." He starts trying to pull me into the house, and I'm trying to resist as hard as I can. After a bit of struggling, he lets go of one of my arms and starts grabbing something out of his pocket, which I presumed was a knife. I did something that to this day I am still thankful worked as he was doing that. I used my free arm to punch him as hard as I could in his stomach. This stuns him for a few seconds and he loosened his grip on me, allowing me to break free. I quickly run to my car, and as I get in, he runs at me and tries pulling me out of the car, holding the knife in the other arm, and even yells, "Why are you making this so fucking difficult?" I grab a half-empty soda bottle I had in the cup holder and throw it, and luckily it hits his head and he lets me go. I slam the door, and then all of a sudden he jumps right on the hood of my car and starts scratching and banging on my windshield with his knife. I put the car in reverse and quickly back out of the spot and quickly reverse down the road with him desperately trying to hold on. He's banging on my hood screaming, "Stop the fucking car." I turn onto the next road as swiftly as possible, and luckily he falls off the hood of my car. I slammed the gas as hard as I could to get as far away from that sick bastard as I could. In my panic state, I drove a couple blocks down the street and kept making turn after turn onto other side blocks as I feared I was being followed. Eventually, I reached a red light and I slammed on the brakes and just sat at the intersection, frozen from what had just happened. I began crying and violently shaking as I was sitting there. It dawned on me that I came so close to losing my life, and I couldn't help but feel like I shouldn't have been alive. Once the light turned green, the first pulled over to the side and just sat there crying. Eventually, I get the energy to drive back to the pizzeria, and almost immediately after I walk in, my coworker knew something was wrong after seeing me. I practically broke down in front of him, and everyone else came to the front wondering what was going on. I fought my tears and explained everything that had just happened. My coworker comforted me and my boss surprised me and began apologizing profusely for what had happened and for putting me on the night shift. He took me into the office and handed me the phone to call the cops. They arrive at the store and I give them my statement, as well as taking pictures of any marks on myself as well as scratches on my car from the encounter as evidence. My coworker followed behind me as I drove home and I collapsed on my bed and strangely enough, I managed to fall asleep. I quit my job the next day and luckily a friend of mine managed to hook me up with a new job at her clothing store. As far as the psycho goes, 2 days later I receive an update from the police. The entire duplex was owned by the guy's brother who lived on the right side with his wife and the psycho lived on the left side of the duplex. I learned that he had been in and out of jail constantly, at first for robberies and assaults, but later on, it was for sex crimes. He had been released from jail about 5 months before this encounter for having sex with a minor. When they arrived at the house, he was long gone and his family had no idea where he ran off to. But the police insisted they would find him, and indeed they did, albeit not alive. I spent the next 2 months in fear that he would find me and finish what he had in mind, but the police contacted me and updated me on the case. Apparently he fled to another city nearby and attempted to kidnap a teenager walking alone late at night on the street. Luckily somebody happened to be looking out the window at the right time, called the cops, and the police caught him trying to force her into his car. He manages to flee and the police chase after him. He blew a red light near a busy boulevard and a van slammed right into the driver's side of his car. By some sort of miracle, the driver of the van only sustained minor injuries while the psycho succumbed to his wounds long before the ambulance even arrived. I thanked the officers for everything they did and for informing me, and I walked out of the station. I walked down the street and I light up a cigarette as I'm taking in everything I had just been told. I don't wish death on people, but after hearing about his death, I felt relieved that he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. I was relieved that I would never have to encounter him ever again and that I wouldn't have to go through with charging him and reliving what happened that night. My last experience 2 years before this was scary, but I think this one takes the cake as being the scariest, as I was alone and face to face with this psycho. Who knows where I'd be if he managed to pull me into his house.